Good morning on this beautiful, sunny third day of the new year. I'm standing on the balcony of my apartment, looking out north. In the far distance, you can see the Magaliesberg Mountains. I very deliberately come out here because that is the posture that we as Africans in South Africa need to take. To look north, to identify ourselves with the African continent and with the people of Africa. To stop being so Eurocentric and Western European-centric. To relate to the needs, the hopes, and the wishes of our people. During this year, I've been asked many times by leaders within Africa and Africans in general, why we as members of the African National Congress have allowed the ANC to become such an instrument of Western European imperialism. Why we have allowed a failed leadership in the African National Congress who seem to be only interested in their own pockets and their own self-enrichment, to bring the ANC to the point where it is seen as the servant and the policeman of Western European and white monopoly capitalism. How we have allowed the African National Congress and the government that the ANC leads to let that whole liberation process that we've worked so hard for, also within BRICS, and the solidarity of developing nations, to slip from our priorities. These are critical questions, and they are asked in the context of one of the most terrible years that we've had in the history of the African National Congress and the history of our country since the first democratic elections on the 27th of April, 1994. I think I can say without fear of contradiction that this last year was truly an annus horribilis. In all the time that the African National Congress was banned and in exile, it never came so close to destruction, to implosion, than it had over this past year. And we're still standing on the edge of that precipice of possible destruction. For us as members of the African National Congress, rank and file members, members in the branches, this poses a fundamental and critical challenge. A challenge that will have to be addressed in this year of 2022. Are we allowing the ANC to be destroyed, or are we going to stand up, principled, and fight, resist this destruction? In fact, renew the ANC as organization, regain the revolutionary heart of the ANC, and make sure that the ANC once again become the preeminent liberation movement that it is in South Africa and indeed in Africa as the oldest liberation movement on this continent of ours. The challenge is there. The critical question is whether we have the conviction and the courage to take it on. The first thing that we will have to do in facing this challenge is to acknowledge that our current leadership within the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, and I include with that also President Cyril Ramaphosa, and the national office bearers have failed us dismally. That this failure is cascaded also through the provinces, in the regions of the African National Congress, and in most of those provincial and regional executives, we are confronted with a failed leadership, and in many instances, a leadership that has sold out. Faced with this situation, we have no other option but to say that these failed leaders who've proved to us that they are unable to change, that they are not going to turn around and in fact start becoming the true leaders, expressing the true will and hopes of the people. They have failed. They've gone far too far down the road of subservient support for white monopoly capitalism. They've sold their liberation birthright, like Jacob for a pot of lentil soup, at the tables of white monopoly capitalism. They have to go. There is no other option. So the first challenge and the first acknowledgement is that this current leadership must go. I'm a disciplined member of the African National Congress. I've served the ANC for 42 years. I can, with humility but also with pride, call myself a veteran of the ANC. I've gone to prison for my membership of the African National Congress and for the work that I've done as a liberation soldier for Mkhonto we Sizwe. In all of that context, I have always tried to be disciplined. I've always tried to avoid, to attack the leadership of the ANC, no matter when I even disagreed with it. And there were certainly times when I strongly disagreed with it. I can tell you that I was not happy with the leadership of President Thabo Mbeki. I can tell you that I was deeply unhappy about the manner in which he squandered the 2/3 majority that the ANC government had in Parliament. And instead of bringing fundamental and radical economic transformation, delivered to us the liberal wishy-washy gear. But despite all of that, I supported the position that President Jacob Zuma held, even when the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress finally decided that President Mbeki had to be removed, that it would have been better not to remove him. So under those circumstances, I hope all of you understand that when I make the call that President Ramaphosa must go, and the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress must go, and they must go now, it is not made lightly. It is made with a full understanding of the gravity of the call that is made and the crisis that we are faced with in the African National Congress. I've watched during the past couple of years how after the Nasrec 54th National Conference of the ANC, triumphalism and political factionalism prevailed from those who were the victorious group. A victorious group that managed to buy their positions with more than R1 billion in a sham election at Nasrec, that brought a president and members of the National Executive Committee into power through brown envelopes, through bribing, through the buying of votes. I've watched how that group, drunk with power, drunk with triumphalism, have destroyed the internal structures and mechanisms for democratic expression within our beloved liberation movement. How they've weaponized the structures in the ANC and even abused our ANC constitution in order to target certain members of the African National Congress, and some of them the most committed members, people who've truly dedicated their lives to the liberation struggle. How they've used disciplinary action to try and undermine and even expel them from the African National Congress. One charge of suspension after the other. I myself and many other members of the ANC have been subjected to this atrocious triumphalism. I've also watched how the legal system and our institutions, our law and legal institutions, have been abused by this governing party and by those who've become the people who now have their hands on the levers of control within the governing party to target their political opponents. In the process, they have severely damaged, and I dare say in some instances I sometimes fear destroyed, our constitutional democracy. Our courts have been turned into handmaidens of these triumphalist leaders drunk with power. They've targeted what they deem to be some of their opponents within the African National Congress, among them the Secretary General of the ANC, who was confronted with trumped-up charges about some kind of oversight. And those charges were used to abuse a resolution that were taken at the 54th National Conference of the ANC and turn the issue of stepping aside into an instrument to specifically target the Secretary General and to remove him, because those leaders who do not like the political and ideological positions that he holds wanted to get him out of the way, and also wanted to get him out of the way in preparation for our next National Elective Conference this year, the 55th National Conference. So our legal system was abused in the same way that it had been abused with regards to President Jacob Zuma. For more than 22 years, President Zuma had been subjected to one persecution wave after the other, to trumped-up charges, to a national prosecuting authority who cooperated with certain politicians in order to try and damage his political career as much as possible. More recently, we've seen again how our courts have been used, and in this instance, even our constitutional court, our apex court, to target President Zuma, to pass a sentence on him which was not constitutional, which was not done in terms of a proper court case, administratively so, throwing into the face of even the law a sentence that was much longer than what the Commissions Act provide for, 15 months of imprisonment, on the basis of a complaint that President Zuma laid with a lot of substance about the biased conduct of the chair of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Now, in the last weeks of the past year, we once again saw how the law is used, especially in the Northern Gauteng circuit of the High Court, to attack President Zuma, undermine the decision to give him medical parole, and to try and push as hard as possible to get him into jail. Vindictive actions by a vindictive, narrow, self-absorbed leadership who do not care for the future of our country, who do not care about the damage that they inflict on our constitutional democracy, who have ripped the blindfold off the face of Lady Justice, gave her eyes, but laser eyes, concentrating only on certain people, targeting them in order to destroy them. Now, my dear comrades, I'm talking about a principle that you cannot abuse the Constitution of the African National Congress in order to destroy what you consider to be your political opponents. A principle that the Constitution of the ANC is there for all members of the African National Congress, that it allows for internal democracy, then it allows for that process of internal democracy to reflect eventually the will, the hopes, the beliefs of our people. All of this, I repeat, all of this is now at stake and in jeopardy. What does it mean for me and for you on this third day of January 22? It means that we have no option if we believe in a truly liberated South Africa. If we believe in the words of the longest serving president of the African National Congress, Comrade O.R. Tambo, that liberation is not just the vote, but it is also the economic empowerment of all the people of South Africa, especially the black poor and Africans. It means that you and I have to roll up our sleeves, commit ourselves to the fundamental organizational renewal of the African National Congress. Work in every branch throughout the country, and cascading up from the branches to the regions, to the provinces, and ultimately to the National Executive Committee of the ANC, to elect leaders who will be committed to the full liberation of our people. Leaders who will be committed to South Africa being part of Africa. Leaders who will not be at the service of white monopoly capitalism and their international manifestation of European and United States imperialism. Leaders who will resuscitate what we have been trying to achieve through our link, through our working together within the BRICS countries. We've got no other option if we want to save the ANC to go this route. And all of us will have to translate that commitment into our personal dedication. I personally, within the next few days, on the 15th of January, will be in front of the National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC, being charged for having expressed my concern and the concern of my organization, Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, about the manner in which our constitutional democracy is being undermined and the way in which our legal system and our courts are being abused, and how the legal system has now delivered to us a dictatorship of the judiciary. I will be charged for having had an ANC tablecloth on the table where I addressed a press conference on behalf of Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association on the 2nd of July last year at the entrance of President Zuma's residence at Nkandla. I will face those charges. I have answered those charges before in another video that is here on my YouTube channel and which you can watch. I will not apologize for what I've said, because I did so under the instruction of my organization, Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association. I did so out of a commitment and belief that the African National Congress needs to be saved. I will also face on the 14th of February another process of trumped up charges, this time in the Escort Magistrates Court for so-called contraventions of the COVID-19 regulations. This is when I stood in front of the Escort Correctional Services facility and did an interview with SABC television expressing my concern and my outrage at the imprisonment of President Jacobs. I'm just mentioning these few examples of how I am being attacked and persecuted. And I know that there are many others. As I've said, our Secretary General, Comrade Sandile Gumede in eThekwini, and many others who are consistently under attack, who are consistently being targeted, who are the victims of abuse of our legal system and our state institutions. Let me wrap up. This year, as I've said, is the critical year in the history of our country that will determine whether the ANC will survive and eventually regain its revolutionary heart, or whether it will be destroyed. We have a duty to work within our organization to prevent that from happening. That process of working within the ANC to prevent the ANC from being destroyed is a sacred revolutionary task that every member of the ANC who is truly committed to the liberation of our country have to carry out. Essential for us in doing so will be to put our own personal interests, our own self-enrichment, everything that is personal, at the service of the greater good. We must be prepared to stand up and be counted. We must be prepared to take the consequences of our convictions, to face the attacks and the persecution that will come with it. We must commit ourselves that we will not become the slaves of money. That as branch members of the African National Congress and eventually delegates to the next National Elective Conference of the ANC, we will not sell our souls and our birthright for brown envelopes. We will stand on conviction. I have 3 children. 2 of them are daughters and 1 a son. The youngest, the son, is 4 years old. My next daughter is 12, and my oldest is 23. They're all young. Many of you who listen to this video have children, young children that you love and nurture, that over this festive and Christmas season you try to give the best. They are the expression of your future, of your hopes, of the hope of your family, and the hope of our nation. It is our duty to secure their future. It is our sacred duty to make sure that they will not become the servants and the slaves of others, of white monopoly capitalists, of Western European imperialist powers, that they will be themselves, that they will be able in the future of the history of this country to be themselves, to have the dignity of full human beings, of Africans who are proud of their own destiny and determine that destiny themselves. If it's not even for our own sakes, what we have to do this year, the commitment that we must make that the current failed ANC leadership must go, that President Cyril Ramaphosa must go, that the ANC must regain its revolutionary heart and again become the expression of the hopes of our people, even if we do not do it for us, as an older generation. Let us do it for our children. This year will determine the future of our nation and the future of our liberation movement. Let us, as those who can make the change, who can bring the change, who can truly save the ANC and save our nation, not be found wanting. Let us, in this continent of Africa, this beautiful home of ours, find our own place with dignity and in full liberation. Nkosi sikelel I Africa. Aluta continua.